Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jon Webb from Game Theory. Don't know whether many of you would have heard of Game Theory in this market, but we're a global marketing consultancy that works with brands, that works with our clients to make sure they're getting the most out of their marketing investment. And by marketing investment, I don't just mean ad spend. I mean marketing in its widest sense, so price, change, promotions, and obviously media. What I'd like to talk about today is how marketing effectiveness, how measuring the impact of marketing, when it's done incorrectly, it can actually have a bad impact on brand growth, profitable growth year on year. We've seen over the last 5 years an increasing trend towards short-termism, people focusing just on the short-term return on investment of an activity. And that's leading to some pretty poor decisions being made. And as we go through the talk, hopefully I'll be able to show you plenty of evidence to back that up. Now, who do we work with? Well, in Turkey, we've worked with both Coach and Visa, with some other brands as well. In other regions of the world, we've worked with big telco players like Vodafone, drinks manufacturers like Diageo, and major retailers across Europe like Aldi, coming out of Germany. So we work for some pretty big brands, and some of the examples I'm going to share today are based on their experiences. So, is that working? Here we go. So this will build slowly over time. And I guess we all know, I mean, some of you are probably facing the pressures yourselves in your day-to-day jobs. Everybody is measuring the impact of marketing, the impact of digital with digital sales metrics and digital media. That's only accentuated that trend. As I said, unfortunately, a lot of the metrics that we're using, a lot of the measurement techniques that we're using, whether we look at market mix models for offline, all the way through to digital attribution for online, they're all focusing on the short term. So the classic KPI that comes out of a market mix study is return on investment. So the incremental benefit of running an activity, like a promotion or advertising, divided through by the cost of that activity. Now, that's a standard metric, and in fact, my company does a lot of that, ROI analysis. Now, the problem is, focusing on the return on investment, when it's measured just over the short term, could really lead to bad decisions being made. So just an example of what a short-term metric might be compared to a long-term. Short-term metrics are characterized by spikes. So you go on air with some TV and digital, you'll see a spike in sales. In the short term, it usually lasts for while you're on air, while the activity is running, and then maybe a couple of weeks afterwards. The longer-term activity, the stuff that really has an impact over the long term and builds like-for-like increases in sales and profitability, that's much slower to build over time. Takes a lot longer. So I just want to talk a little bit, before we get onto that table, actually, I'll just go back. Maybe I won't go back. I'll leave the table there. Why is there a trend towards the short term? Well, part of it is because it's easy. It's very easy to measure the impact of something in the short term. You go on air, you see a spike in sales, you can see how much the activity drove, the cost of that activity, so you've got a return on investment. It's pretty straightforward. You can do it within 3 or 4 weeks of the event ending. Looking at things developing over the long term, that takes a lot more data, it takes a lot more time, and the techniques are a lot more complex. So many people don't do them. And related to that is the time horizon over which success is judged is becoming shorter and shorter. Now, with some of the large corporates that we work with, brand managers tend to be in place for anywhere between 8 months to a year, sometimes a little bit longer if it's a really big brand, but most of them are in place for a relatively short period of time. Now, if a brand manager is there for a year, I guess they're going to plan and be involved with maybe a couple of media campaigns, maybe 4 or 5 big retail promotions within FMCG, but no more than that. And even that, for some brands, that's stretching it a little bit. So they're going to need to see an impact from that activity that they've planned pretty quickly. If you're an ambitious young brand manager, you want to get promoted, you want to work on the bigger brands, it's a very, very risky strategy to put in place something that's going to pay back over the next 2 to 3 years. And yet, those activities that pay back over the longer term dwarf massively the impact of any short-term return on investment. And let's have a look at that. Let's put that into context with this table. So this was analysis that was run for a global retailer. They, one of our bigger clients, they operate in 120 markets. We don't do the analysis in 120 markets, but they're a massive player on the global stage. The table shows basically the payback from their advertising. And it's the multiplier that takes you from the short-term effect of media to the long-term effect. So we've got call to action, we've got introducing new ranges, and we've got creatives that emphasize brand values, such as quality, inclusivity, that kind of thing. There's a massive range in the multiplier. So the call to action spots actually have no impact in the long run. So you see the spike in sales, and then that's it. There's nothing after that at all. When you advertise brand values, on the other hand, the increase in sales lasts for up to 2 years. So you'll see a smaller increase in sales in the short term, but then for every single week afterwards, sales remains higher by a relatively small amount, but because it's there every single week of the year, it adds up to a lot of money. And you can see the multiplier there is almost double the short term. So something that looks good in the short term doesn't look so good in the long term. Advertising brand values pays back. It just pays back over a long period. So from that, hopefully we can see that just call to action spots where maybe we say, come in this weekend if you're a retailer because there's a price promotion or there's some kind of deal on. Yeah, price promotion, I mean, they look good in the short term, they look good in the weeks that you're running it, but not afterwards. Whereas advertising brand can really have long-term benefits. And the logic behind that is the purchase funnel or the path to purchase. Now, it's a digital world, right? I mean, I get that, and I get that a purchase funnel has been disrupted and is quite short. Moving from awareness all the way down to activation might have taken weeks 5 years ago. Now it takes days, maybe within the same day within some markets. But the purchase funnel is still there. You've still got to build awareness. Maybe people now do it through search on their mobile phones, but you've still got to build that awareness. You've got to stimulate interest. You've got to build demand before triggering the final activation. And I guess this is where, so I think this is the laser. Yeah, let me just come over here. So a lot of the call to action spots would be operating down here, building demand and running the activation. Now, I guess the thing with a funnel is at the bottom, it's really small. So with a call to action ad, you're only talking to a tiny fraction of the potential audience. What you do when you build brand is inherently upper funnel. You're building awareness, you're building interest. People might not be in the market right now, but they could be in 6 months' time. They could be in the market in a year's time. If you build that awareness and interest now, when they are in the market, they won't necessarily choose your brand, but they will probably consider your brand. And it's building that level of interest that really pays back in the long term. I got a sticky remote. Here we go. So just before we go on to look at some case studies and some evidence, I just wanted to pause to think, what's marketing really about? I'm going to read this out because it's a quote. I guess everybody's got their own views on what marketing's really about. This is from Peter Doyle, who used to be a professor at one of the large business schools in Europe. I just read it out. Marketing is increasingly about creating customer preferences where there are no real differences between competing products. So I just read the key part of that again. Creating preferences where there are no real differences. Or I guess to bring it up to date and using Byron Sharp's language, creating mental availability. Hopefully he's not here and he won't call me out for misquoting him. Right, well, what does that mean? Let's have a look. So here we've got some ibuprofen. It's a well-known pain relief, effective at combating headaches and general pain relief. Pretty cheap. Apologies for the UK price, but pretty cheap, 35p a pack. You get a pack of 16 tablets, pretty high strength, 200 milligrams of the active ingredient. So 35p, pretty cheap. Seems like a no-brainer to buy that. But On the shelf below it, in a retailer, is a branded alternative. Now, look at that, costs £2.20, almost 6 times the cost of the private label, the private label alternative. 6 times the cost, and it's exactly the same product, exactly the same ingredients, exactly the same strength, exactly the same number of tablets in a pack. It takes exactly the same amount of time for the active ingredient to get into the bloodstream. Everything is exactly the same, and yet millions of people are buying a pack that costs almost 6 times as much. Now, that's the power of a brand. Just to go back to the quote, that's creating preferences where there are no real differences. And the value of the brand here, I mean, this is a brand that's worth about, I don't know, just over £100 million, I guess, in the UK. So it's quite a big brand. The value of their strategy is worth effectively, what, £1.80? Almost £2. Let's call it £2. It makes it easier. £2 multiplied by every single pack that is sold. Now, they didn't achieve that through luck. It wasn't a fluke. They didn't achieve that price premium by focusing on promotions, by focusing on hitting a short-term return on investment. They focused on solving a problem for their consumers. They solved it. They hit that price premium by creatively working out what the pain point of their clients were, their consumers were, and solving that. And that's the real power of creativity and advertising. It's trivial. It's easy to go out on TV or digital and say, come into the store this weekend because we've got 20% off all our prices. That's trivial. Anybody can do that. The real power of marketing is in building a brand where you can charge a price premium of effectively £2 on every pack that's sold. It's amazing. And you know, I'm one of them. I even know everything about Nurofen. I know it's exactly the same product as the own label, and I still buy it. And that's not an isolated example by any means at all. Now, I would imagine most people here know about Brand Z, but for those that haven't come across it, Brand Z it's a study run by Millward Brown, part of the WPP family, and it looks at the power of individual brands. So things it considers are the ability to charge a price premium, the willingness for consumers to try the brand for the first time, and the willingness of consumers to repeat buy. It's run globally, it's run in all markets. Now, so we're going to look at, if you had $100, sugar. If you had $100 back in 2007, and you had a choice of where to invest it, if you'd have put it, I'm going to read the numbers out just so I don't get them wrong. If you'd have put it in the S&P 500, so the S&P 500 is a stock index that looks at the 500 biggest companies in the US. If you'd stuck your $100 in 2007 in the S&P 500, by the end of this time period, you'd have got about $180 back, $182 back. Well, that's pretty good. Alternatively, if you'd have stuck it in what Brand Z classes as the top 100 powerful brands globally, you would have got back $225. So that's no comparison. If you'd stuck it in the Brand Z index, you would have got $45 more for every $100 you invested. Again, that's the power of a brand. So, and there's a degree of overlap between the S&P 500 and the Brand Z study, of course. You know, Facebook would be in both, for example. But there's no doubt that if you'd invested with what Millward Brown or Brand Z class as the top brands, the most powerful brands, your financial performance would have been a lot better. And that's the power of a brand. It's clear differentiation, and it's in cold, hard cash. That's the power of marketing. Let's just move on a slide. And again, another example, this one focusing just on looking at the returns from advertising. Again, this is from one of our global clients. In pink, we've got some short-term impacts of marketing. Some of them are promotions like this, some are advertising campaigns. They're all call to action ads. It's a retailer, so it's pretty much call to action. Come in because there's a discount, come in because it's a new season, we've changed the range. Underneath it, we've got the long-term effects. essentially an increase in the base level of sales. So what marketing has done here, we've got a combination of ads, call to action, and brand building. And over time, the brand building ads have succeeded in changing people's tastes and preferences. So they now prefer this retailer, this brand. They're more likely to go there than elsewhere. Now, I'll go back to the short-term return on investment. The reason there's a problem with looking at ROIs, or return on investment, is because it takes a long time for this kind of effect to show through. So that's roughly a 3.5-year period. I've taken the dates off, but it's roughly 3.5 years. Now, most return on investment studies that I've seen, and I've been doing it for about 20 years, most of them look at just a period on air and maybe up to 6 months afterwards. And that's most of the ones I've seen from various different agencies. Now, fortunately, game theory don't do that. We look at the longer term. We use more complex methodologies than MMM or market mix models to make sure we capture that evolving base. And by the way, an evolving base is not a new concept. So the founder of the company I'm with, Game Theory, Simon Broadbent, Callahan O'Healy, guys in the UK and America, they were writing about this in the late 1980s and early 1990s. I guess finally, the difference now is finally the maths has caught up with their theories. And now we can actually capture that long-term effect. And it's pretty powerful. And in the long term, the impacts of that brand building activity will always pay back at a high, well, always, nearly always, pay back at a higher level than any short-term activity. Let's look at another example. So the chart here shows price elasticity. So price elasticity, I guess most people will know how important it is. An elasticity describes the rate at which something changes. So in this case with price, a price elasticity of -2 means that if you increase the price by 10%, sales volume will drop by 20%. So the elasticity is just kind of like a multiplier to get from the change to the actual input. For the brand we're looking at here, they started with a price elasticity of about -1.8. So push the price up by 10%, sales go down by 18%. By the end of the period, their price elasticity was about -0.8, a lot lower. People were a lot less sensitive to price. Now again, they didn't get there by advertising short-term promotions. They didn't get there just by focusing on a medium-term or a short-term return on investment. They got there by focusing on long-term brand values, whether it be inclusivity, whether it be quality, whether it be care for the environment. They worked out what they stood for, they worked out what their consumers needed, and they went out and they solved that pain point. And by solving the pain point, focusing on the problem that they were solving for their consumers, they took price out of the equation for an awful lot of people. So we've worked with them for a long time. Again, I'm going to give you some results, and I'll read them out so I don't get the numbers wrong. They increased their price by around 5% at the end of the period. So they knew that their price sensitivity was going down. We'd worked with them for a long time. We'd built up a level of trust. They kind of bought into the results. So they knew that customers were becoming less sensitive to price. And they pushed the price up by a small amount. Had to be a small amount because it's a risk. It's a huge business risk if you put your price up when everybody's seeking for value. And it was quite a tough negotiation with the retail accounts. They're just as keen to make sure the prices don't go up in their stores so that they can compete on price with their competitors. So it was a tough sell, but they pushed the price up by 5%, a small amount. That led to an annualized increase in profitability of £1.5 million. Now, the brand was worth about £80 million at the time. So an increase of profitability by £1.5 million was a big deal. That was a huge result. If they'd increased the price when they were down here, they would have had a loss of £300,000. With a price elasticity that high, too many people would have quit the brand. Some people would have stayed with the brand and paid the higher price, but too many would have gone. But with an elasticity up towards -0.8, enough people stayed and paid the higher price to make the move profitable, to make the move very profitable, increasing margin by £1.5 million. As I say, that was a big deal for the company and for the brand. So I guess I've said quite a lot about why we shouldn't just focus on the short term. And the short term is, I guess, in my view, represented by return on investment from market mix models and, I guess, fractional attribution, the really, really short-term stuff from digital attribution studies, almost where you're looking at which publisher does best on a given afternoon, never mind, sales impact within a week. So if the return on investment and the output from digital attribution is misleading, leads us to make the wrong decisions, well, what should we be looking at? What should be the metrics that matter? And I guess for me, our starting point, when we work with a commercial enterprise, a commercial company, our starting point is that the key metric that matters is year-on-year increases in profitability. So we're only talking about commercial companies. I accept there are a lot of not-for-profit companies, a lot of companies that work in the charitable sector. But if your goal is profitability, then the KPI has to be increases, year-on-year increases in that profit. So sure, lots of other things important. So how we treat our staff is important, how we treat our consumers is important, how we treat the environment, how we treat the communities within which we work. They're all important, but other things being equal is year-on-year profit change. If that's what we're aiming for, then what metrics, what secondary metrics should we look for? What's best correlated? What's best associated with that increase in profitability? Well, I'm sure it differs market by market, and I guess you guys will know the key things in your sectors within Turkey and within this area of EMEA. But this is what the IPA thinks. Now, the IPA is the Institute of Practitioners for Advertising in the UK. They've looked at hundreds of studies in the UK over the last 5 years, and they've found that the metrics that are associated with increases in profitability year on year are basically, well, you can see them listed there. Large sales gains, market share gains, strong gains in brand health, loyalty, and reduced price sensitivity. But the most stark message from that table for me is that just 15% of campaigns that have reported successful long-term growth in profitability have also reported a strong return on investment. Just 15%. And for me, that's the clearest message, really, that focusing on just the return on investment can lead you to make poor decisions. Now, I'm not saying that return on investment should be scrapped or thrown away. It's clearly a pretty powerful metric. It's very good at showing efficiency. So where's the most efficient point to advertise? Should I advertise in TV or print? Radio or digital? How should I stagger my advertising? I kind of know that TV, if I run TV, my paid search will do better, but how much TV do I need to run first? And then how much search do I need to do? It can help with diminishing returns and saturation effects. So it can help with all of those things. But it is not, and never has been, a predictor of long-term growth or long-term success. And I think that's my key message. So thank you very much.